速度与激情。早上好中国。现在我有冰激凌。
Alright, that's enough of that. I'm pretty sure you weren't expecting a Duke Nukem voice to come out of my mouth. No? Well, too bad. In this video, we're going to dig through the shelves of shovelware. We're going to dig into the shelves of jewel-cased games because obtaining big box copies of games just to let it sit in the shelf for about 30 years isn't entirely my thing. I tend to buy things just to make use of them, and at least with jewel-cased games, I mostly use them to dump the contents to my network drive, or sometimes I just use them just because I feel like it. Here we have Duke Nukem 3D. Released by 3D Realms as a shareware title on January 29th, 1996, while the full version was released on April 19th, 1996 as version 1.3D. This apparently marks the second title to be released under the 3D Realms name, who are basically just Apogee Software under a different label. The last game under the Apogee Software brand was Star Gunner, which came out several months after Duke Nukem 3D. Nowadays, 3D Realms kind of became its own company when it was bought out by a Danish investment firm, while the original developers later rebranded as Apogee Entertainment. At the end of the day, while some will say 3D Realms was responsible for Duke Nukem, it was actually Apogee Entertainment. Anyways, prior to the game that is well known for its pop culture references and one-liners,
that's one doomed Space Marine.
Duke was a platformer released on July 1991, which sold enough copies for Apogee to develop a sequel to Duke Nukem 2, which came out days before the shareware version of Doom had come out, which had overshadowed a bunch of games. One game in particular would be Blake Stone, another Apogee published game that came out 5 days earlier. Following the release of Duke Nukem 2, Apogee decided to make the next Duke game as a first-person shooter, using the nearly finished build engine by Ken Silverman, and development would likely start somewhere in mid-1994. At the time of writing this video, however, the oldest available pre-release build for Duke Nukem 3D currently dates back to December 30th, 1994, officially titled Lame Duke. This build was released by 3D Realms 1 year after the original shareware release. There was also a late shareware beta leaked by a magazine previewer with minor differences. In 2014, plenty of unreleased materials and even builds were recovered, but it is currently unknown if those materials would become public. I can only guess that time will tell. The closest you can have for the time being is an add-on for the game called Legacy Edition that combines the pre-release concepts and materials to some degree alongside many quality of life changes. Having myself playing it for a bit a while back, it does feel like a different game in comparison. As you can already tell, Duke Nukem 3D had some interesting development history. I won't go too in-depth about it, but let's just say certain areas that were in Lame Duke made it to the final game. Even the earliest pieces of level design made it to the final game as well. From what I recall hearing from sources, many of the game's levels were likely dumbed down to ensure that players who were stuck on the aging 486 platform could really enjoy this game. Aside from level design, there was also various design choices that were explored but never made it to the final game. Like Duke having knee pads, Pig Cops having these wacky double-barreled shotguns, the Enforcers were capable of shooting out plasma then later changed to shooting out flames, before just settling on just using the chain gun cannon. There was even the Expander weapon that, while it didn't make it to the final game, it made its way to Plutonium Pack, and the Freeze Thrower was originally going to be a laser chainsaw but eventually became a flamethrower during development. Alright, that's enough of that. We're here to discuss the full version of this game. What makes Duke Nukem 3D an interesting game, however, is the interactivity you wouldn't see in other first-person shooters at the time, such as arcade machines, exploding buildings, security cameras, pool tables, bars, and even strip clubs. Yes, Duke Nukem 3D had interactive strippers you can tip. The game takes place after the events of Duke Nukem 2 as Duke returns to Earth, descending from Los Angeles, in hopes of taking a vacation of course. However, his ship was shot down by alien hostiles who are invading Earth and have mutated the LAPD. With Duke's vacation plans ruined, he hits the eject button, vowing to do whatever it takes to stop the alien invasion. Duke Nukem 3D came with 3 episodes: LA Meltdown, which is the shareware episode of the game and showcases the interactivity of the game itself, whereas Lunar Apocalypse takes place in space, and it kinda takes a bit of a break from the interactivity. But I will say that it's still an interesting episode to play as it further demonstrates certain features of the build engine, like moving sectors acting as a way to transport to different parts of a level. I do believe that this episode has a dark tone to it, mainly because the aliens were capturing women and unfortunately there's no way to save them. Ouch. Then there is Shrapnel City, which Duke returns to Earth just to deal with more aliens before his encounter with its leader, the Cycloid Emperor. What also makes Duke Nukem 3D even more interesting at the time was the one-liners voiced by John St. John. While other games prior were basically mute protagonists with only grunting and screaming noises, killing aliens and interacting with the environment allows Duke to say catchphrases.
I'm gonna kick your ass, bitch. Damn. I'm looking good. I'm Duke Nukem, and I'm coming to get the rest of you alien bastards.
Optionally, you can turn off the Duke talk and the sexual content if you wanted to, as this game along with others faced controversy mainly because of its graphic violence and sexual themes. Now, an even funnier story is when Walmart sold the game with the adult mode forced off, causing 3D Realms to release a patch for the so-called special edition to unlock adult mode. The weaponry of Duke Nukem 3D starts off with a pistol that reloads after several shots. Despite being a starter weapon, it is still useful for picking off weaker enemies, just enough to collect more ammunition for other weapons, like the shotgun, which appears to be modeled after the Winchester 1300 Defender with a pistol grip. This weapon could be found early on in the game, either through a level itself or dropped by pig cops. The chain gun cannon, also known as the Ripper, is a 3-barreled chain gun capable of tearing up enemies at close range, while the RPG is your typical rocket launcher. But the splash damage is a bit tricky to avoid, but also deals great damage. Duke himself would also make use of pipe bombs that can be found either in a set or a single one. While it is good against enemies, however, it does make good use of level progression by blowing up cracked walls. The Shrink Ray is one of the more unique weapons in the game, capable of shrinking enemies, allowing you to stomp them to the ground, as usual. They are sometimes useful against tougher enemies like the Sentry Battlelord and the Fat Commander. The Devastator is a dual rapid-firing rocket launcher capable of dealing more damage at a faster rate. Really effective against enemies, but I'm not so certain about multiplayer. The Laser Trip Bomb allows you to set traps on walls, but I don't use them very often. Honestly, it's interesting for a novelty, especially when the levels themselves have already planted trip bombs as shown in the 3rd level in the game. But aside from relying on any explosive weapons in the highest difficulty in the game, or let alone being put in a position where you're low on ammunition to even resort to that, I just don't see many use cases for the trip bombs, if I'm being honest here. The freeze thrower basically freezes enemies, allowing you to shatter them into pieces with your mighty boot. To be honest, I had mixed feelings about this weapon at first, because it wasn't as useful in multiplayer compared to the god tier shotguns and RPGs, but it does reward a player with an atomic health power-up when you successfully kill a player with it. Now, I did say that the shotguns and RPGs are god tier. Well, that's because from time to time, I recall various competitive players at the time, mind you, state that the only useful weapons in the game were the shotgun and the RPG, especially when you mix it with steroids, which gives you an extra speed increase, and is also capable of unshrinking you. But honestly, I have found times where the other weapons were proven to be more useful. In the case of the pistol, it is often regarded as a mini sniper rifle against weaker enemies. Not to mention, by the time you start playing on the highest difficulty, damn I'm good, it's like I said about the laser trip bombs. You have to heavily rely on weapons capable of jibbing enemies, as they don't respawn when jibbed, making the game itself a bit more challenging. While Duke Nukem 3D is considered the easiest out of the other build engine games, I had a bit of a challenge on the second episode while playing this on my 486 DX4 clocked at 100 MHz. The music for Duke Nukem 3D was composed by both Bobby Prince, who is famously known for the music from Doom, and Lee Jackson, who is also responsible for the iconic grab bag theme that would carry over to future Duke Nukem games going forward. The soundtrack itself does manage to capture the tone of the levels themselves, while some became more memorable with the likes of Stalker from Hollywood Holocaust and the city streets from Death Row. but I will have to say that my favorite track of the game itself is Aliens Say Your Prayers. Now, following the release and success of the original Duke Nukem 3D, Apogee decided to recycle some of the content and ideas that did not make it to the final game, which became a 4th episode of the game titled The Birth, where Duke was dispatched to Los Angeles to fight more aliens as they, hence the name, captured a woman to give birth to the alien queen. I'm gonna have to say it, Episode 4 has a more darker tone than Episode 2. Admittedly, I was originally not too interested in playing this episode in the past, and always felt that the original 3 episodes were enough. But having played through this episode for the sake of making this video, I would say that if you want more Duke and the extra content, then by all means, I would recommend this episode. It is also worth noting that at the time, in order to play through this episode, you would need the Plutonium pack to upgrade your copy to 1.4. As this version included the episode, an extra enemy, a boss, and an expander, while also the in-game menu font got changed for better or worse. Now, it's all personal preferences here, but I always preferred the original font from 1.3D. However, by the near end of 1996, Apogee decided to combine both products as one, with the release of the Atomic Edition in December 11th, 1996. This version of Duke would continue to be sold as the definitive version of the game, making the original 1.3D release abandonware. Which also brings me to the next statement that I'm going to talk about in this video. It is worth noting that Duke Nukem 3D became such a critical success that it was able to receive several console ports and spin-offs. But sadly, the next major game would soon turn for the worst. That is because we would witness the disastrous development hell and release of Duke Nukem Forever. This game would be the catalyst in why Duke as a franchise is dead and in limbo. I mean, I can go on and on about why it is unlikely that a new Duke Nukem game or reboot or whatever could happen, especially with a greasy company holding the property and barely doing anything with it outside of a half-assed remaster.
You want to take this key? Ah, what the fuck?
If you want to call it that, alongside with stuff that almost nobody asked for. Duke Nukem meets Bulletstorm, Duke Nukem on a very niche game console that nobody ever heard about, Duke Nukem G Fuel, Duke Special Brew, the list likely goes on for the worst. In the past, the way you could grab the game legally were at Steam and GOG. However, if you're one of those people who owned General Arcade's release titled Duke Nukem 3D Megaton Edition, you would have also gotten some add-ons that were authorized at the time and the MS-DOS version as a bonus. But following Gearbox Software's takeover of the property, that and the original releases were taken off of the storefronts. Nowadays, if you wanted to legally grab a copy of Duke Nukem 3D, you would have to go to Zoom Platform and buy it there, as some deal was struck between them and Gearbox Software, who currently hold the rights to Duke Nukem. While Duke is practically dead, whether people wanted to believe it or not, there are some people that still make content for the game, as the game's CD originally came bundled with the build map editor, allowing people to make custom levels for the game. At the time, it was an easy editor to use, unlike the other editing tools for other games back then. The strong point about the Build Engine editor was its ability to view a level both in 2D and in 3D in real time. Nowadays, you can still play and make content for Duke Nukem 3D, using various source ports like eDuke32, which also comes with its more updated map editor Mapster32, which continues to carry the wheel of the original build map editor. However, do keep in mind that this is not going to be like your typical Doom builder, so learning and mastering how the editor works along with coming up with good workflows is key. Now, not only were you able to create your own levels, but Duke Nukem 3D has its own interpreter in the form of con files. This allowed modders to change some of the behaviors in the game, which would soon be expanded upon, starting with Atomic Edition and later eDuke opening up more modding potential. Duke Nukem 3D would also be advertised for internet play following the partnership between Apogee and the Total Entertainment Network. Just like Doom 2 being the main popular game on Dwango and Descent being one of the main popular games on Kali, Duke was the main popular game on 10. Though my history with the multiplayer scene dates way back to the Xbox Live Arcade port. which came out in September 2008 and was usually one of the more popular ways to play this game online next to network guiders like Yang and Meltdown. But I don't think you can buy this game anymore, especially when the marketplace for Xbox 360 closed down a while back. And it's already bad enough that you can't buy this game on GOG and Steam nowadays. So the only way to play this game on consoles now is through the 20th Anniversary Greece Edition. I will say that nowadays you could still play this game online through Classic Gaming Arena if you like playing the MS-DOS version even on authentic hardware, or through Nukem.net if you just want to play it through source ports. Do keep in mind that your experiences playing this game will vary. Now, what are my thoughts on this game? Well, I think it's a great game for its time and demonstrates the power of the build engine, unlike the earlier or more obscure titles before it. However, I am more fond of Blood from 1997, which also uses the build engine. However, without Duke, I feel like Blood would have been a more different game. If you don't mind making a Zoom platform account just to buy a copy of this game, then go for it. I will link this game in the description down below. Anyways, that's about it for this video. What are your thoughts on the current state of Duke as a franchise? I would like to hear about it in the comment section down below. Thank you all for watching, and as always, peace out everybody. See ya.